Um, I'm just intervening to make an announcement. Yesterday, we had a very productive session with the Chief Minister after he made his keynote address, in which researchers asked the Chief Minister questions which would help clarify the research mandate and how it interacts with policy. So taking the cue from that, Honorable Minister has kindly agreed to take some questions from researchers today as well, and we'll do it now. And while you're formulating your questions, I will lead off, if I may, with the following question. Mr. Minister, you said that the first pillar, and I think your observation is absolutely correct, while we are moving towards low-income, middle-income status economically, social indicators are truly abysmal. So having human development as the first pillar is exactly the right way to go. But the question that comes to one's mind as a researcher is that most of the traction on the ground, the difference between saying and doing is really at the provincial level in terms of human development, health, education. All of those are provincial issues. And it would be very interesting to know from you how the federal government positions itself in a dialogue with the provinces, especially after the 18th Amendment, to give traction to this extremely important pillar.
You've asked a very good and a very important question. In Pakistan's context, 18th Constitutional Amendment, which was passed recently, has created a new social contract in a way between federation and the provinces. And many functions which traditionally were either with federal government or were jointly managed between federal government and provinces have been devolved to the provinces. This has created a new challenge in governance. In my view, there's some areas which have been devolved, which were previously the joint responsibility of both center and provinces should not have been devolved. But now they have been devolved. So if we let the situation freeze here, we are going to have very catastrophic outcomes in a decade's time or in a 2 decades time. For example, if we let education be handled by provinces on their own in the 4 provinces, we might reach a point where there were previously different systems of education in terms of metric and A-level and O-level and Urdu medium and English medium. We might create a new division which is provincial-based education systems, wherein degree of one province may not be recognized by other province in terms of its academic standards. So there is a need that we must have some basis to have national standards for education. So what we are doing in Planning Commission, that we find ourselves in a unique position to bring all the stakeholders together where provinces can also come without worrying that they are being called by their former masters to maybe take away their freedom which they have earned with great difficulty. I was recently able to convene a meeting of all the education ministers from the 4 provinces, where they came without any reservation, because if this call had been given by Ministry of Education, they would think 10 times, should we go or not? Maybe the Ministry of Education is again trying to be our boss. So should we go there or not? So we are a neutral platform. And this is a new role which we are discovering for Planning Commission, that it can play a role of a coordinator between federal government and provinces in areas where functions have been devolved. So this Inter-Provincial Education Ministers Committee was able to then agree that they will form a permanent structure of this committee so that we can have coordination between provinces and the federal government on education issues. And they also agreed to form a national curriculum council which will set national standards for curriculum across all provinces. So through such coordinating mechanisms, we think that we can play a very positive role and we can bring the provinces together, because if we did not do this, there is another danger that those provinces which are more developed, they will grow much faster, and the provinces which are less developed, they may lag behind further. And this devolution which was supposed to empower the federation will actually result in weakening of the federation by creating greater inequality between federating units. So we need to create platforms where different provinces can come together to share their best practices, and also which creates kind of a competitive dynamics within the provinces so that they have to catch up with each other. So this is a role, I think, which a planning commission can play very effectively, and through such interventions we are trying to bring them together. Again, another example is MDGs. We are answerable wherever we go in the world for our poor performance, but federal government has no role. So, but if we create such coordinating platforms where federal government and the provinces can sit together and work on joint strategies, I think that will make things much more effective.
Thank you, Minister. So, let's take more questions from the floor. I saw Ms. Surjit Bhalla and then Ben Olkan. Maybe let's pick up a couple of questions and then ask the Minister to respond.
Yeah, following up on Ijaz's question and your answer, in your speech you said that there is a greater need to plan than ever before. Yet that seems somewhat contradictory with the role of information and, if you will, the example that you gave of BlackBerry. So my question is the following, that as per education, wouldn't it be much better rather than to have back again to centralization and central coordinating authorities, that the provinces set their own standards, and then there's no lack of information transmission today? Are we setting up policies as to what we experienced 30, 40 years ago, where information was at a premium? Now people, civil servants, politicians are all going to be held accountable, and if a province has a bad education policy, quote unquote, it will correct itself. So how is a national coordination mission going to achieve anything that, if you will, a regular process of devolution, information and accountability will do?
Again, I think BlackBerry failed because of poor planning. They failed to visualize the changes which were happening in their marketplace, and that is what the role of planning is. As I said, the nature of planning has to change. If you have greater uncertainty, probably you need to think more about different scenarios, and maybe now you have to do scenario-based planning rather than fixed line planning. One of the fundamental roles of education is also to, give you greater mobility. And if you have different provincial education systems which only restrict you to a certain particular province, I think that the whole spirit of education is also defeated. I mean, the idea is that through education you should have mobility within your province, at the national level and at the global level. So to ensure that national level mobility, there has to be certain conformity between the education systems which different provinces are following. So we are not saying that, when we have a National Curriculum Council, it is going to be very prescriptive. What it's going to do, that it's going to at least set some national level standards on which we can ensure that all the 4 provinces have education outcomes which are compatible with each other, and they are conforming to certain national standards which we want to see. Within those standards, they can certainly do a lot of innovation suited to their own regional requirements.
Thank you. Ben?
Great, thank you very much. I'm Ben Olkan from MIT. And I'm going to be speaking later about some of our work with the Excise and Taxation Department here in Punjab. One thing, so given my interest in tax and in sort of improving the sort of civil service in tax, I found your comments on the revenue side very interesting. Particularly, as you noted, there's been some reforms to try to create more competent and honest tax officers and other sort of tax administration reforms. One of the things that I think is very important is exactly this issue of how do you select and attract kind of the best people to become members of the civil service more generally, and in particularly in tax, where sort of the difference between a sort of a competent and honest tax officer and one who's not could be enormous in terms of revenue to the government. So I'm curious to find out more about what your impression of how successful those reforms have been, whether there have been sort of serious studies of how effective those have been, and to the extent there's more work to be done to learning to understand those, I want to sort of invite you to work with us to sort of think more seriously about how to really understand how to make that problem of selecting the best people into the civil service most successful.
I think this whole, we are examining this whole process of selection of civil service. We have to now make some deviation, in my opinion, some departure from the old model which only recruits generalists and which has an assumption that this generalist cadre which has been recruited, they will solve all our problems. I'll give you one example. In 8 months, I have tested 3 or 4 PROs who are given to us by Ministry of Information. These are, these media officers or public relations officers. Every PRO I've asked, what's your background? Have you ever worked with media? What's your education? Someone has education in geography, someone has in agriculture, someone has in computer sciences, but no one has had any handshake even in their career with media or mass communication or any subject like that. Now, how is this officer designated as a press relations officer, media relations officer? Because he appeared in a particular exam, he could not qualify for higher services, and randomly this is the service where his or her merit came, and he or she is now assigned press information corps or group. Now for rest of the life, whether this person had any aptitude or any background, this person is to be an information officer. Now this is absurdity. You need certain core functions in government for which we need very fundamental specialized backgrounds. Similarly, I would say that for tax administration, we should have greater number of officers who have maybe MBA backgrounds or who have economics background, who have solid quantitative skills to do their work, rather than somebody who has MA history and now he's a tax officer because he just happened to have luck and get better marks. So these are some of the reforms on which we are now working. How to see that which are the areas in which we need core specialists and how can we attract them. And then also, not only by attracting them or recruiting them, how do you create an incentive structure which will enable them to keep performing, and how will you reward them? Now if 100 officers are selected, if all 100 have to make it to grade 22, then there is no incentive. So just as military follows a pyramid of progression, in civil service we are also now looking at ideas, how can we bring in that pyramid model so that there is greater competitiveness within the ranks to keep themselves fit. And lastly, right now unfortunately, cost of doing work in government is greater than cost of not doing work. If there is a competent, good officer, he or she is not doing her work, but also work of 5 or 7 other colleagues who are non-performers, but does not get paid extra. So for the same salary, this officer works 10 times and the other officers are enjoying having pretty good time. So this is all negative incentives. So we are trying to address all these through this reform. We have started an engagement process with the stakeholders. We are having one major workshop in our National School of Public Policy later this month on 20th, 21st. We have started an open discussion on this, and we hope that in next few months, we will be able to come up with proposals in which we will bring performance and incentive at the core, and also specialization at the core of civil service reform, which has been missing in the past.
Thank you very much. I think we are running out of time for this session, so perhaps we should conclude the question and answer part of this. Some of the questions can be carried offline.